Welcome. Thank you for attending today's webinar hosted by the Organization Development and Change and Workforce Education and Development Program at Penn State. Today, we have the great pleasure of welcoming our presenter, Dr. William J. Rothwell and Dr. Choyum Park. My name is Jenny Lee, and I'm a PhD candidate in Workforce Education and Development Program. We also have Sagan Giri with us today, who will be managing chat feature and Q&A session. In terms of the interactive format for this webinar, please open the chat feature in the Zoom platform to interact. If you have any questions about the presentation, please use Q&A feature on Zoom. You can see the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Click the Q&A button and write your questions. The Q&A session will be at the end of the presentation. Our online Master of Professional Studies in Organization Development and Change can help you prepare to implement quality and continuous improvement initiatives in an organization. Furthermore, there is a PhD program in Workforce Education and Development with a concentration in human resource development and organization development. Our program has created a continuous monthly webinar series with experts around the world. Today, we welcome Dr. Rothwell and Dr. Park. Dr. William J. Rothwell is a professor of learning and performance in the Workforce Education and Development Program at the Penn State University. He is also president of his own consulting firm, Rothwell and Associates. At Penn State University, he heads up a top-ranked graduate program in organization development and change. He has authored, co-authored, edited, or co-edited 300 books, book chapters, and articles, including 127 books in 7 languages. Before arriving at Penn State in 1993, he had nearly 20 years of work experience as a training director and HR professional in government and in a multinational business such as Motorola, General Motors, Ford, and many others. We have a co-presenter, Dr. Park. Dr. Choyum Park is an assistant professor of organizational learning and performance at Idaho State University. She is teaching human resource development, organization development, change management, adult learning, and followership courses. She has nearly 15 years of experience as an HRD/OD professional at Samsung. As a consultant, she worked with companies in diverse industries to innovate learning and environments. Her expertise and research interests include organization development and change, organizational learning, workplace learning and performance, innovation in learning, and leadership/followership. Here are Dr. Rothwell and Dr. Park.
Thank you very much. We're delighted to be here today, and I'll just mention that I have published many books in the field of organization development. Here are a few of them just for you to see what we will be talking about today. And I've also co-edited an entire series with John Wiley of books written by many authors well known in the organization development field. Here's just a few of the book covers from that book series. But let's get right into today's session. And let's start with an opening poll. I always love polls to get my audience engaged and to get you to start thinking. So let's launch the poll. Do you feel that groups in your organization are already doing an outstanding job of working together effectively through virtual means? Or do you think it's just adequate? Or do you think it's not so well? Please take a moment to vote. So what do you think? I can't tell if you're voting or not. Well, you did vote. Okay, 12% think you're doing an outstanding job. 76% think you're adequate. 12% think there is room for improvement. Well, that's the focus of our discussion and presentation today, is how to make virtual interaction more effective. So, of course, today we can joke that virtual meetings are basically modern seances. People get around and research says that the single most common comment people make on Zoom is, "You're on mute." And of course, technology itself has almost become an additional and sometimes disruptive partner in our communication process. So today we're going to be talking about how we can help people work together more effectively in virtual settings. And that's very important because so much work is now done in those venues. But few managers have been trained on how to encourage effective, cohesive group dynamics. And that's really what we want to get into and talk about today. So like any good trainer, I have objectives, targets to be met by the end of today's session. Here they are. By the end, you should be able to understand why virtual group coaching is important to you. You should be able to define what exactly it is, give us a model on how to go about the virtual group coaching process, talk about how you could actually apply virtual group coaching to make your team more effective and work together more cohesively. Talk about how the role of a virtual group coach is carried out, exactly who can do it, when should they do it, where should they do it, and so forth. And we'll understand, or you should be able to understand, who should perform this role. Do you need to bring in an outside consultant, or can anyone who's given this role play the role, or what? Who does it? Our agenda, any good manager has an agenda. So here's my agenda, our agenda today. First, we're going to talk about why we should care about virtual group coaching. In other words, what's the business case that argues in favor of devoting time, money, and effort to this topic? Then we'll talk about what is it exactly? What is virtual group coaching? How does it compare to some other approaches that have been around for a while? Then we'll talk about what approach, and there's more than one, that can guide virtual group coaching. And at the end, we'll give you a summary of the overall webinar and an opportunity to pose some of your own questions, and we'll be delighted to answer those. So let's start out with a virtual chat. Here's a chance for you to exercise your fingers. Post your answer in the chat box. What are some of the challenges that you face in conducting virtual meetings with team members? I mean, we've all had to learn how to do this during the pandemic, particularly since so many companies have gone through shutdowns. And in many cases, the government entities in our areas have forced us to do that. We see a few of these coming through: engagement issues, people talking over each other, people multitasking, probably sleeping on their keyboards while we're trying to hold a meeting, people with cameras off and you don't know whether they're there or not. Yes, technical issues is a big one. That can create big problems for us. The connectivity issues, great. You got the idea of why this is a challenging area for us to deal with. So I'll turn it over to Cho to talk a little more about why we should care about this topic.
Thank you, Dr. Rothwell, and thank you everyone for sharing your ideas or experience that we may encounter during virtual meetings. So as you can see, many of them are related to group dynamics, interactions, or processes. So now I'm briefly talk about why we should care about what group dynamics in virtual settings and why we need virtual group coaching. So as the pandemic began, we have seen a lot of changes in our workplace. So probably many of you worked or have been working remotely in response to the pandemic. But actually the transition to remote work is not just because of the pandemic. Even before that, remote work had been increasing and the pandemic just accelerated this trend. So as people work from home, according to some surveys, about 20% of workers are working from their living rooms, and about 29% of workers are working from their master bedrooms. Also, remote work requires their employees to spend some money to purchase equipment to perform their job virtually. But even though people are equipped for remote work, home environments are different from office environment. So there might be more distractions or difficulties to communicate or collaborate with coworkers. But that being said, 65% of people who have been working remotely would like to continue to working remotely even when the pandemic is over. And about 33% of people prefer a hybrid work arrangement. In spite of the popularity of the remote work, recently companies have required their employees to return to the office. But there is an interesting survey. The survey asked both CEOs and workers if they want to see steps in the office full-time in 2021. And the survey results show that about 83% of CEOs answered that they want to see steps in the office full-time, while only 10% of workers answered that they won't be back in the office full-time. And there is another survey that shows that about 58% of respondents who worked remotely during the pandemic would look for a new job if they weren't allowed to continue working remotely in their current positions. So you might have seen similar surveys or news articles, although the numbers are slightly different. So the survey results indicate that the turnover rate may increase after the pandemic. So in order to attract or retain talent, companies will need to allow remote or at least hybrid work. So the transition to remote work brings some changes in communications. So let's talk about how and why communication changes in virtual work settings. So anthropologist Ray Birdwhistell, who coined the terms kinesics, that means the study of body motion as a form of nonverbal communication, believed that most communication occurs through nonverbal cues. So he estimated that about no more than 30 to 35% of social meaning of a conversation or interaction is carried by the words, and 65 to 70% of communication is nonverbal, meaning face expressions, gesture, body positioning, or a proximity between speakers and listeners. And later on, psychologist Albert Mehrabian found that only 7% of communication is delivered through verbal cues, meaning spoken words, and 38% of communication is delivered through vocal cues. That means diverse sounds other than spoken words, like a tone of voice or accent or laughing, etc. And the remaining 55% of communication, which is the largest portion of communication, is delivered through visual cues, meaning facial expressions or body language, etc. So vocal cues and visual cues considered as non-verbal cues. That means only 7% of information is gleaned from verbal components, while 93% of information is delivered through non-verbal components. But these research studies were about communication in person, in physical settings. So in virtual settings, communication may occur differently. So just as I mentioned, most communication occurs through nonverbal cues, but in this webinar, I cannot see your face expressions or body languages. And I don't know if you are now yawning or laughing. And I don't even know if you are now sitting in front of your computer. And the same thing will happen during the virtual meetings. So for virtual meetings, so diverse types of communication medium can be used, such as video conference, audio, phone call, text message, or email or something like that. But depending on what communication medium is used, the non-verbal component of communication may be limited, so some information can be lost to some degree, and it will affect communication in virtual work settings. And in addition to communication medium, cultural differences also affect communication in virtual settings. So if organizations allow people to work remotely, either partially or permanently, there might be more diversity in the workplace because there might be more employees who will work from different countries, or there might be more people who have different cultural background. It will make communication in virtual settings more difficult because people from different cultural background may communicate in a different way. So for example, in some culture, women speak out less than men, and in some culture, silence means agreement, while in other cultures, silence means some problems. So with limited but non-verbal components, it is really difficult to understand what is going on and what is happening during these meetings. So these differences in communication in virtual settings may cause some issues. So people may be less able to access information, less engaged with coworkers, or less productive due to the lack of communications or miscommunications. Or people may feel isolated due to the lack of social interactions or sense of belongings. And people may find it difficult to build the trust among team members because nonverbal components is critical in exchanging emotions, developing a bond of sympathies, or developing trust among members. So these issues may make dynamics in virtual settings different from those in face-to-face settings. So, as we discussed, virtual or at least hybrid work has been on the rise as a new ideal workplace model. But the differences in communication for face-to-face setting and virtual settings makes of influence dynamics, team dynamics or group dynamics. And as you know, group or team dynamics influence team or group effectiveness greatly. So to keep a virtual group or a virtual team effective, some special effort focusing on increasing group interactions or processes are necessary. And that's why we need virtual group coaching. So Dr. Rothwell will continue to explain what virtual group coaching is and how it can be implemented.
Okay, thank you, Cho. And this part, we're going to define what it exactly is virtual group coaching, some of those differences that happen in virtual settings and emphasize the importance of group dynamics in terms of getting work results in today's virtual work environments. And exactly what are the characteristics of an effective virtual team? So let me spend a moment and talk a little bit just to give you a frame of reference. In the 1960s, a professor at MIT named Edgar Schein, who's very famous for his work on corporate culture, coined the term process consultation. And in fact, I teach a graduate course in process consultation as part of our MPS and OD degree online. What is process consultation? Well, be careful. That word process is sometimes confusing because Schein was working in the days before the process improvement movement came along. Process improvement, many managers are familiar with that idea of studying the workflow of the organization and intervening to try to find ways to reduce or eliminate bottlenecks in the workflow or so forth. In the field of organization development, though, the word process does not mean workflow. The word process means interpersonal relationships. So process consultation is a change effort involving helping groups of people who work together in face-to-face settings work together more effectively. And philosophically, there are often differences in how organizational leaders think of the need for process consultation. In some organizations, the leaders will bring in a process consultant, either from outside the company or from inside, an internal consultant, to help a dysfunctional team find ways to work together more effectively. But in other organizations, the assumption is that no group of people are working together as effectively as they could be working together. And the same logic, if we move the logic of process consultation from face-to-face settings into virtual environments like video conferencing, like audio conferencing, like text-based messaging, like collaborative software where we work together in text in real time as a team to write a document or deal with flow charting or other group activities. When we do that, it's not just the work task, the what we are doing that is critical. Also important is how we work together. And that's exactly what we're talking about with virtual group coaching. So how is it different from process consultation? The process consultant typically sits in a residential meeting, watches how the team members and the manager interact among themselves, and then at the end of a meeting, stands up and facilitates a conversation, leading the group on how the group could work together more effectively in the future. Well, the same logic can be applied in virtual group coaching. But as you remember Cho saying that there can be differences between face-to-face venues and meetings and those that are virtual, Marshall McLuhan, some of you remember his name from the 1960s, famously coined the idea that the media is the message. And by that, he meant that how we communicate affects the nature and the perceptions about that communication. And it affects how people feel, how engaged people are in the work they do. That's critical to getting results when the results involve that we need out of a group involve creative thinking, involves innovation, involves intellectual work, and dealing with intellectual challenges. So virtual group coaching is essentially process consultation on steroids moved into different settings and across many different devices, whether the devices are laptops or cell phones or iPads or many other devices that change the way we interact. So some of the key differences we know, as Cho started or mentioned, body language. Typically, we can't see much body language when people are in virtual settings. We lose a lot of the interaction, the ability to see nervous tics like people jiggling their foot that might indicate a certain level of anxiety or nervousness. We often don't see facial expressions, particularly if it's a video conference with camera off. We don't know what people are doing. They could be sleeping on their keyboard. They could be in the other room going to the bathroom. We don't know what people are doing. And this can sometimes lead to group confusion because we really don't know how engaged and involved people are in the decision-making and interaction occurring online. And if we're communicating in written form as opposed to oral discussions that we could have by video conference, we all know the dangers of email. Email and text-based messaging will often lead people to conclude that someone is angry or sarcastic or ironic or something when in fact the person is not. They're just overly brief in their comments in response to an email. So all of these can change perceptions and the way that group members interact around their work activities. So team dynamics are important. Most work today is intellectually challenging. It is not physical labor where we have to pull out a shovel and start sweating to do our jobs like most jobs were in the early 20th century. Today, most work is intellectual, and most work requires brain power of multiple people to achieve the best results. And for that reason, how well a group of people interacts among the group members and how well one team interacts with other teams can be particularly important. So all of those are issues that affect people's productivity in virtual settings. So there is research on what it takes to have highly productive virtual groups. And we can actually, and it's very effective, to start out with a team that's working virtually to establish some ground rules of how we will interact as a group. And typically, and you can find a lot of those on the web through a simple browser search, and present those to your team members and ask them to vote on which rules, so to speak, rules of engagement, rules of group interaction that we want to adopt as a team. That can help set some boundaries on how the group will interact. And here are some examples of what we would see, some standards of effective virtual groups or teams. The group's efforts align with that of the organization. People have clear roles. They know who does what. There's some flexibility in how we achieve goals, but people also feel part of something bigger, the team, the organization, instead of feeling isolated. And we know loneliness, if you've been reading the popular press, has emerged as a major issue during the lockdowns and the isolation caused by the pandemic. Suicide rates have skyrocketed. And in part, this is because of difficulty in figuring out how to transition from working together in residential settings and working together virtually. Sometimes people who work together in virtual settings feel lonely. Their managers call them together and focus only on the work task and then get off as quickly as possible. But there's a need to pay attention to the group's feelings and how people are feeling, both physically and emotionally. And by doing that, we show that we care about people, we care about our team members, the manager cares about his or her workers, and this is very helpful in building an environment where people want to be productive to their peak. So let's talk a moment about what approaches can guide virtual group coaching. In other words, exactly how do we carry it out and who does it? We'll talk about that in this section. So of course, one guide, a step-by-step guide for virtual group coaching, is the very famous Kurt Lewin action research model. Now, this is a model that guides and can guide all change efforts that are built around facilitated change rather than managed change. Facilitated change means we work with the people to achieve results. Managed change often means we whip people and make them perform. Sometimes we meet stiff resistance because they don't buy into the efforts that we're making because we didn't bother to explain what they were, and we didn't ask for their thoughtful commentary on perhaps better ways to achieve the same goal. So this model begins from the standpoint of entry. We have some issue that we want to address, whether that's a problem to solve or a vision or a goal to realize or achieve. During the startup, we get clear on who's doing what. In assessment, we collect information. In the context of virtual group coaching, we would poll the group. How do you think you are working together? How well do you think you are working together? What are the areas for improvement? We're not focused so much on the task, the work that they're doing, the what. We're focused on the how of interpersonal relationships. How are decisions made? How do people feel about the team and the group? How do people feel about their manager? At the how of everything. And then we feed it back. And the virtual group coach does not dictate, does not diagnose in the same way a medical doctor would diagnose, and then prescribe medicine to the team about how to improve their interaction. Instead, the virtual group coach will facilitate a discussion of the team about the new goals they would like to set as a team on how to improve the team interaction, how they will track it, how they will implement it, how they will celebrate success. So that's facilitated change. And the coach works with the group to plan their plan, and then sits in perhaps many meetings and offers suggestions on what was seen, and then confronts the group with the actual data on what the group was doing. So, and then evaluates the results. And adoption means that corporate culture change. So when people see what the virtual group coach does, it's often a very effective way to teach people how to play the role of virtual group coach. So if we have a consultant sit in and model it a few times, then a team member can take over and apply this model. So why watching is helpful? Well, the presence of a virtual group coach, we're all probably familiar with the role of a facilitator. A facilitator, the essence of facilitation is asking. And the process of asking questions gets people to think and makes them more creative. Well, a process consultant or a virtual coach watches. The facilitator asks, the virtual group coach watches the team, how they interact, and collects that information. And then typically at the end of the meeting, will feed it back and engage the group in a facilitated discussion about how the group could improve their interaction. So the whole presence of a team, of a virtual coach on a team, will change the group dynamic. People know that they're being watched, and they will realize that if they interrupt other people, that will be noticed and commented on at a future time. If there is a struggle with technology that should have been worked out ahead of time, that will be noted and will become a target for improvement. So typically a virtual group coach doesn't just sit in one meeting. The virtual group coach is there for a chain of meetings and maybe a permanent fixture of the team environment. So virtual group coaches will typically watch what people are doing. The manager, how the manager behaves, how much the manager talks, what kind of comments the manager makes to people. We'll watch each worker, how each person on the team is participating, and interact and watch how other people who may come in and interrupt the meeting. We've all been in virtual settings where a small child rushed in the room and disrupted things, or a cat jumped on the computer keyboard and created a furor with the team. Other people can have, when people are working from home and are working in virtual settings, there can be many distractions. And so those can be indicators. Who else might be watched? You see what I'm saying? So what do we watch? We count how long people talked. Is it an effective meeting if the manager speaks 57 minutes and team members speak 3 minutes? Is that the kind of balance the team wants? And exactly what are our expectations about team involvement? What are our expectations about silence? What does silence mean? Cho mentioned that in her section. Does it mean agreement, disagreement, or nothing? And if we get no comments and a decision is being made, what does it mean? And so these are the kind of things that a virtual group coach would watch. Who poses questions? What kind of comments they make? What kind of group feelings seem to be present? What kind of distractions and interruptions tend to be coming up? Does the meeting start on time? Does the meeting end on time? If it's a long meeting, are breaks given? And how long are those breaks? And how is the meeting paused? And how do we resume? Does it resume effectively? How is the technology used? Are we getting maximum advantage from that? Or are there a lot of distractions coming from problems with the technology? These are all issues the virtual group coach is monitoring and then feeding back to the team or the group for discussion by meeting end. So when do you watch? Well, I talked a little bit about that earlier. When do we watch the whole group? And remember, we can do more than just watch the group. We can intervene with the manager outside the group about the manager's behavior in the group. We can intervene with individual disruptive team members outside the meeting and talk to them and say, what's up? What's going on the way you are behaving in the meeting? And talk to people. And discussions with the manager, with 2 or 3 or more people outside meetings definitely will affect group dynamics when teams come back together. So remember that there's more than one kind of technology that we can use, and we can apply all of those. We can use virtual group coaching with all of those. We can monitor video conferences. A lot of us are on a lot of Zoom meetings. Some of us are zoomed out with so many meetings, but audio conferences are particularly prone to some communication issues. So a virtual coach can be helpful there. Phone calls with individuals, we can monitor how that's going. Text messaging. So there are many media that could be the point of focus for virtual coaching. So sometimes I get the question, well, can't the manager be both the virtual coach and the person running the meeting, the facilitator? Can't we do both? Be a facilitator and be a virtual group coach? Well, of course we can do that. And we can also watch 2 television shows at the same time. If you have a teenager, you know what I'm talking about. Teenagers do this. They get the remote control and they flip from one channel to another, and they watch 2 shows at the same time. You know the problem with that. You can follow part of the plot in one show, and then the commercial comes on, and you follow the other show, but you miss the part between. And that's the problem that a manager faces when he or she is trying to do both. Play task leader and focus on the work to be done, the what, and play virtual group coach and deal with observing and providing information about the nature of team interaction. Those are 2 different channels, like 2 different television shows. Yes, you can do both. And we know that it's also possible for a single parent to raise a child. But does the child grow up? And there's research that says that children who grow up in single parent families miss out. And the same issue can be a factor when we talk about whether the manager can be the virtual group coach or whether we want to assign this role to someone else, either an external facilitator we bring in from outside, or an internal consultant who might come from HR or some other area of the company, or a member of our team that we brief and train over time to play the role of virtual group coach. So how do you enact the role of a coach? Well, you enter the scene. You got to explain to people what you're trying to do, because this is a new role and a lot of people are not familiar with it. Additionally, a lot of people are scared in today's workplaces. They don't exactly trust their work environment because they're worried that they might be subject to layoff or downsizing or a reduction in force or some other euphemism for getting terminated. And so consequently, it's important to enter the scene. When I do this role, I will send out an email ahead of time and explain to people what a virtual group coach is. And then in the first meeting, I explain it, and then the manager explains it. And I script out what the manager will say, because I've actually had them say the wrong things before, and make sure that people understand the role of virtual group coach is to help people improve the way they work together. Well, for the first meeting or two, the group will change behavior because they don't trust this spy in their midst. But over time, when they see that I'm a fly on the wall and I sit there, and at the end, I facilitate a discussion about how the team can work together more effectively, they see that there is a match between what I say I'm doing, the role I'm playing, and the role I actually do play with that team. And then they catch on. And over time, people say, hey, I could do that. And we can gradually hand over that assignment to a member of the team. They catch on quick about exactly what a virtual group coach does. So here's a job description, essentially, of the components of what a virtual group coach would do, what the manager might be expected to do, and what each team member might be expected to do when working together in a virtual environment. And I don't have to read through all of these, but you might want to pull out your cell phone if you don't get the slides for this and take a picture of this particular slide, because it tells you on one page exactly what each member should be focused on. The virtual group coach facilitates the process, helps people by introducing who they are, what they're doing, the role they're going to play. They talk about how they will help the group communicate more effectively. They play fly on the wall and they watch how the group members interact, who poses questions, what kind of questions, how often each group member talks, and so forth, and helps the group engage on planning improvement in how the group members will work together as a team now and in the future. The manager plays a different role. The manager's job is to focus on the task, the what we're supposed to be doing in this company. What work results are we supposed to be getting? What are our team targets? What are the goals we're expected to achieve? What kind of output are we expected to get? And the manager may have some important roles to play in dealing with group dynamics. For example, we often look to the team leader or the manager when one team member attacks another team member. Oh, you're not doing your job. Well, when we hear comments like that, it can prospectively damage the group process. People tend to shut down when they're attacked or when someone else on the team is attacked. People, it's not effective for group interaction. So a team leader is expected to address some of those interpersonal attacks that can occur. the team virtual coach can call a timeout when those kind of violations of group ground rules occur and say, hey, timeout, you just violated your own rule of not attacking team members. There's no name calling permitted. You all signed on to that rule. You just violated it. Now what? And so you direct the team's attention to the need to work together more effectively, and name calling doesn't cut it. Personal attacks don't cut it. Problem solving does cut it, and the virtual coach can help facilitate that along with the manager. Team members are expected to participate. That doesn't mean stay silent with a video camera off and sleep during a team meeting. It means full engagement, all hands on deck, and we talk about that if we see evidence otherwise. So this is basically what we expect of different people on a particular team.
Okay, so in order to help you implement virtual group coaching, we will provide tools that you can use in your organizations. So you can download handout 1 using the link provided in a chat box. And handout 1 is a group process questionnaire. So it includes items to assess how members feel about their group processes. So this tool helps group assess their own group dynamics. So you can distribute this tool to your virtual group members and ask them to fill out that questionnaires. And once all members complete it, you can provide virtual group members with feedback on what they said about their group. Then virtual group members can discuss together to identify what areas of the group interaction needs to be improved. Also, you can download the handout 2 using the link provided in the chat box. And this this tool can be used when watching group process during a virtual meetings. So this instrument will guide you on what to watch. So in the left column, you can see the items that you needed to observe. And in the right column, you can write down your observation to provide feedback for virtual group members. So you can also use this tool to help your team members play their role as virtual group coaches. So manager can hand this tool to a team member and ask the team member to fill that out during the meetings. So, and then at the very end, the team members can share what he or she observed during the meeting with other team members. So this tool will be very helpful to help your group members to act as a virtual group coaches without further trainings. So those tools close the loop between theory and practice. So using these tools, you can just apply what we talked about today when you go back to your job. So also, if you want to know more about virtual group coaching, you can read the white paper that Dr. Rothwell and I wrote, and you can access that white paper using the link shown on the screen or the link provided in the chat box. So today's webinar is based on our recent book, Virtual Coaching to Improve Group Relationships, Process Consultation Reimagined. So that white paper summarized our book. So if you read the white paper, so you will be able to learn what virtual group coaching is, how you can implement that in your workplace in more detail. Okay, then let's summarize today's webinar. So through this webinar, we hope you are now able to understand why you should care about virtual group coaching, and what virtual group coaching is. Also that you are able to implement the virtual group coaching using change models and facilitate the coaching process to enhance group interactions among virtual group members. So thank you for paying attention to our presentation. So we have some time for Q&A. So if you have any questions, please leave your questions on Q&A box.
Thank you, Dr. Park and Dr. Rothwell. So yes, we do have a couple of questions. So I will begin with the first one. So an attendee asks, how do you then intervene effectively upon noticing detrimental behavior of the team and its members?
Well, I can take a shot at answering that. First of all, we don't label things. We try to avoid that because labeling will tend to make people defensive. So if I say, oh, you just engaged in activity that's a problem, people become defensive. It's better to try to keep our feedback as virtual group coaches value neutral and focus on the evidence and the data. For example, if someone makes a nasty comment, then we look at the ground rules of the group and we see if the ground rules require people to be civil and courteous to each other. If so, then we can quote back what we heard them say and compare that to the rule, and then ask the group for the group's thoughts about whether such commentary should be permitted. And so we're using the group itself. We're not playing doctor and giving them medicine to cure their illness. We're playing mirror. We're mirroring back what we observed, what we heard, and then confronting the whole team with that, and then asking the team for the team members' thoughts. So that way we end up with people being required to take responsibility to follow their own ground rules. So that's how I would answer that question.
Thank you. So we have time for one more question. Gail asks, when I have ongoing meetings with intact teams, I establish ground rules. Are there specific rules you would recommend for teams meeting via a virtual platform?
Joe, any thoughts on that?
Oh, I think there is no specific rules that can be applied for all teams or for all virtual teams, because all teams have different characteristics. And I think the virtual group coaching is the process to make their ground rules, so they can watch their group process and figure out what is the problem and what rule they can identify what ground rules we need. That's why we need, I think that's why we need virtual group coaching. So how about you, Dr. Laswell?
Well, I think we can engage the team in an activity where we ask them to identify some rules. A quick Google search will uncover a great many examples, and then they can sift through those, and we may want to do multi-voting on which of those are the most important for a given team. And so we don't have to reinvent the wheel, but the team members know the issues that they have going on. So the ground rules should start out being focused around trying to help the team improve the problem areas or build on the strengths that the team's already experiencing. So engage the team in helping them come up with their own ground rules. That's what I would recommend.
Thank you, Dr. Rothwell and Dr. Park. Back to you, Jenny.
Thanks, Hyun. I would like to thank Dr. Rothwell and Dr. Park for sharing knowledge, expertise, and wisdom with us today. If we didn't get to your question, please feel free to send us an email, or you can reach out to the presenters directly via email. On behalf of our OD&C program, we hope you found this webinar helpful. We would like to hear your feedback on our webinar series. Please take the survey using the link in the chat box. If you cannot get the link, we will send it to you via email. Our next webinar is about shared leadership, bottom-up approach to leadership and change by Dr. Jongyu Park on September 24th, Friday from 12 to 1 p.m. And also Penn State OD&C program and Workforce Education Development Program is offering its first virtual conference on November 19th. We invite everyone to join us for learning and networking. Registrations for all events can be found on all of our social media platforms. Thank you all for attending today, and see you in the next webinar. Thank you all, Dr. Rothman and Dr. Park.
Thank you.
Thank you.